So I was not born in 68, but when I was a teenager, when my friends, they would look at this map of the world, they would see the plates, and I was always been impressed about how plate tectonics has diffused in the culture, so that people, when they see that, they see a concept which does not really exist, but which is imprinted in the mind of so many. Plate tectonics is like any model. It has its problem, its issues. So here you see a map of Peterborough, and the crossed-hatched regions that you see here are the regions where it is expected that plate tectonics theory cannot work. This is a small area compared to the area of the planet. However, it's the area where a lot of geologists go, the Himalayas, the Andes. These are objects that are very important for the geologists today. So this area asks the question of how can we improve the description that we have from this revolution. So what will plate tectonics still be our paradigm in 50 years? How do I know? I don't know, and I feel a bit stupid to try to make a prediction. But what I'd like to do today with you is to try to explore some alternate paths that can give us some insight of how we can improve from the basis of the theory. And to do that, I want to use this slide to illustrate how we apply a model to the Earth. And so we start with some incomplete observations, as you see here. And then we need a theory, a model, that will help us to know what's in the gaps. A little bit of cooking, and then we have a model, a prediction. And so for like plate tectonics, we have some observations like that. We have the theory, the geometry, kinematics, little bit of cooking because you have to play with the model and the data. And then we have a model which is actually better than this. This is more my models. And first, I want to focus on some ways to improve the plate tectonics foundations, which are based on how we can have more information from observations, say, to get a better description of the kinematics at the surface of the Earth. And so the first type of improvement, I'd say it's our bionic plate tectonics or augmented plate tectonics. That means that we keep the foundation of plate tectonics, but we try to add a little bit of something that will help us to go a little bit forward. And so what has been done quite many times now is to use the seismic tomography model and try to find slabs inside the mantle and use these images with all the rules of plate tectonics to get a better plate reconstructions, better kinematic reconstructions. So there are different types of works for that. I just illustrate with two types of works. So this is the work of the group from Taiwan. And here is sort of it's a cube made from the tomographic model of the MIT, I think. And so what you see here are the regions where we have a fast VP anomaly, and those fast VP anomalies are identified as slabs, and they are characterized finely. That geometry is characterized finely by this group. And the idea is that these slabs, they give us a geometry constraints that of what was at the surface before. So you have the slabs, you put it at the surface, and then you play with the geometry constraints to provide a new reconstruction of, for instance, in this case, the Philippine Sea, this kind of region. So here we use the geometry of slabs inside the shallow mantle. Some people have been going even deeper. So this is the work of Van der Meer that you see. And the idea here is that slabs, they sink vertically. And so if you identify in tomographic model, so this is one here 1,325 kilometers. When you identify a blue area, it corresponds to a slabs that has sunk since some time, so you have to assume a sinking velocity, and then you can reconstruct the slab position at 120 million years ago. And if you go deeper in the mantle, so here, you do the same, but it was back even further back in time. So, for instance, this blue area here would be an intraoceanic trench, correspond to an intraoceanic trench 240 million years ago. So, doing this, you have ways to go beyond some limits of time, that the seafloor limit of time. So there are some issues about this, that we always have problems with these improvements. They bring advantages and they bring power and responsibilities. So here, just to illustrate that, the behavior of slabs inside a convective system, you see different slabs. Maybe the model is not right, but still, it suggests that the slabs can fold, and it's difficult to recover the geometry of a folded slab. The complexity of the sinking and the interaction with the rest of the mantle is modifying clearly the geometry of the slabs inside the mantle. And also, if you consider that you have a net rotation, meaning that the surface moves relative to the interior, then the vertical sinking is a bit of an issue, and we know that there is a bit of net rotation, at least today, at the surface of the planet. So these are the drawbacks. Another way to have these augmented plate tectonic models of the past is to try to think geodynamics, meaning that we're going to assume some processes that are geodynamically sounded, not necessarily proven, but sounded. So when you do that, for instance, you have two examples. So here's the group of Oslo. What is assumed to go back further in time is that the large igneous provinces are always formed on the edges of stable in time large LLSVPs that you've seen before with Anne. And so, for instance, in this work here, the position of the South China is reconstructed back in time, and because there is a lip here that should be on this edge right here. So doing that is an improvement if it works well. We can have a new constraint and add that to the plate tectonic model. Another type of model is like this one is the recent work of Earthbite, the Earthbite group, is to say the net rotation of the surface, the rotation of the surface of the planet compared to the if we consider the interior stable, is not very high. So they work around the uncertainties on their reconstruction, and they try to find the models that minimize the net rotation in their reconstruction. And so, for instance, in this type of model, the black corresponds to the classical model. And the yellow one is the one that, among the uncertainties, would give you the one that has the least net rotation. So it's 150 million years ago in that case. And so, for instance, you see here that this is the net rotation in degrees per million year as a function of the age right here. And you have lots of different models that are from before. And when you do that when you add this constraint, you obtain this type of net rotation evolution in these models. The drawback for this type of approach is that it's like me when I watch a cricket game. I don't understand the rules. So these geodynamic ideas are sounded, and they can probably be verified. Maybe in the future we'll see they are right. But still, we don't have a clue of if they are really true or not, and it's difficult to move beyond that with the models. So a new type of approach has been done for a long time to try to improve the plate tectonic reconstructions, let's say. And the approach is more to work on the model side, maybe less than the observations. And for that, one way is to say there are more types of plate boundaries than the three classical types we have. The diversity is larger. We have to release some constraints on the plate boundary types. And this is a sounded issue. For instance, even if we look at areas that are very we suppose being classic for plate tectonics, like here it's in the Pacific. In fact, when you look at the Clipperton or Siqueiros transform faults, in fact, the Clipperton is transpressive and the Siqueiros is transtensive. So even this kind of typical transform fault, they still have some motion that is not completely purely transform. So it starts from there, and it goes to the diffuse plate boundaries, which are not really described by the plate tectonic model. So here you have this classical diffuse plate boundaries that you have heard about already between India and Australia. And so I take this work of Stephen Zatman with Rich Gordon. They try to use actually the framework of plate tectonics and try to apply a kind of kinematic and geometric analysis to describe how diffuse plate boundary starts evolve in time. And so what they propose is a model where the Euler pole stays in the diffuse plate boundaries and can move around and describes well what happens in these plate boundaries and around, and the plates around. Well, it's more than that, but I refer to the paper if you want to know more about that. What is interesting here is that we can just add something new inside the plate tectonic framework, a new plate boundaries. About for the plate boundaries, there are those which can, like for mountain building, it's a problem. So we have for a long time, there's been for a long time some work done on like thin viscous sheets or some sort of viscous models to see how the deformation will be when it's diffuse in the orogens. And this is kind of related to now the new generations of models, which are more like thermomechanical models in 3D and stuff like that, where in fact you impose some kinematics. In both models, you impose some kinematics, eventually forces at boundaries. You impose the force, what happens at these boundaries, and then you try to see how the plate boundary or the diffuse plate boundaries, or even like here, it's a transform region, how this evolve in time, what are the rules for them. For instance, I didn't find it, but I know that Taras tried to see in a dynamic model are the geometric rules for the triple junction still working, for instance. But the drawback, there are always some drawbacks in this type of models, is that what we lack here are the forces, the drivers of the whole system. We always impose some kinematics in the system, and in fact, we can study a region but making a lot of assumption of what's driving the whole thing. So some other types of model I've tried to put together the plates and mantle flow. So but they kind of release the rigidity of the rigidity constraints of the plates, trying and couple it to the mantle flow to have some of the forces mantle flow and also the gravitational potential inside the lithosphere to see what is the deformation at the surface. So this is one type of model, which is maybe the most advanced in terms of numerics. So here, what's been done is to build a model with very fine description of plate boundaries. So they are imposed here, the plate boundaries. But here, forces are imposed by assuming some structure for slabs and assuming also that we can transform the tomographic model into a buoyancy model, density model. So we have the force inside the wall mantle acting on the lithosphere. And so when you do that kind of model, you obtain this type of result. So at the top here, you have a map of here is the strain rate at the surface of the model. So you can, in principle, compute the strain rate within deforming plates. And so what you have here is the comparison between the plate tectonic, typical plate tectonic kinematics in green and predicted kinematics in black. So here, plates are not rigid, but still you predict velocities that are quite well, but you see some difference between those two models. What is interesting in that type of model is sometimes to study areas like backyard basins, places where you have a lot of deformation, and we can try to see if that fits the earthquake mechanisms, this kind of things. So another way that we can do such approach, is to push. You have a convective system, convection inside, plumes, slabs, everything. But you push the surface with a kinematic model, and at the end, eventually, you can check when you release all the constraints of plate boundaries and plate rigidity and everything. You can check if the buoyancy, the buoyancy field that you've produced by pushing that corresponds to the one that you have used before. So internal consistency. So I don't know if I don't think it's very useful to go much into the details, but what is interesting with this type of model is that when you introduce the forces within the mantle, you go from a model of plate tectonics where you have lateral motion to a model where you can predict. It doesn't work anymore, or what? Yeah, you can predict some vertical motion here. So it gives you access to a new dimension inside in this type of system. So I will not talk about dynamic topography, but this is the kind of information. The problem with this type of model is a bit like a lottery, because for that to work, you need, in fact, to have a good description of the temperature inside the system or the buoyancy field for today. And the translation for tomography to buoyancy is very difficult to make. And if you push the plates from a long time, you have to assume what was the initial condition, which you don't know. So you have this, and also the rheological problem. So people try to develop inverse methods to overcome this problem, but yet we can't say it's really solved. So to finish, I would just want to show you some models that are the ones that I'm working on, where I want not to use anything from plate tectonics. Doesn't mean that I don't respect and love it, but just to see if only with dynamic feedbacks between the lithosphere and the mantle in terms of mechanical properties and things like that, can we obtain something which is close to what we observe at the Earth today. So the idea here is that there is a dynamic feedback between what happens at the surface and the inside, and so you can't. It's not the mantle that drives the plates or the plates that drive the mantle. Both are interacting, and it's a complex system from which plate tectonics is an emergent property of the system. So Dave has talked a little bit about that, but since 20 years now, there's been a lot of work to try to see what are the conditions to produce a sort of plate tectonic-like behavior at the surface of convection model, so having this sort of dynamic feedback. And one way that I'm going to use right now is the one without memory that Dave talked about, and hopefully the memory will come at some point. So the idea is that when the stress reaches a critical value, then the viscosity, because it's a viscous model, the viscosity drops, and it drops as the yield stress increase. And so there is localization of deformation, and it produces some sort of plate boundary. And as Dave said, if stress decreases, then at some point this plate boundary is sort of forgotten in that kind of system. It's the first approach. So I've done some with my group. We've done and some other groups in the world. We've done some work on that in plate tectonics. But today I just wanted to finish. Just wanted to show a few things from a model that took me a very long time to make, and that may be interesting for nice pictures to finish. So this model, I tried to make a model where I have the same influx, the same plate velocities, the same type of topography, the same type of plate-like distribution, plate size distribution. This, edge, also seafloor edge distribution as the Earth today. And in this type of model, there are things that I may not have needed, but I put them because I know that people are interested in them. Like, like this LLSVPs here. So what you see is just a snapshot of that model, and so you see here the interior. So what you see in the interior in colors is the difference between the average temperature at a certain depth, and so when it's blue, it's colder, so you see sort of slabs, and when it's in red, it's hotter. So you see plumes or hot regions right here. So what you see here as a contour is a hot isotherm. So you see that here the shape of plumes in that type of model. So you have this whole complexity inside that exists. And at the surface, this is what you have. So here, there are, in this snapshot right here, you have continents that are aggregated right here in yellow. What is in red here and in blue, red to blue, is the divergence of the surface. So when it's red, it means that it's ridges. When it's blue, it's trenches. And I put another color code, which is the vorticity. So it's between green and purple, and it shows you, it helps to show you how transform faults are generated inside. These are not really faults, more like wider regions, but you still have transform motion in this type of model. So what you see here is a sort of back arc system right here, a ridge system right there, another trench right here. And so with this type of model, you can actually test the sort of geodynamic rules that have been assumed for the augmented plate tectonics. Like in one of the models that we made, which is simpler than this one, we have computed we try to understand where the net rotation comes from, how it evolves. And so you see that in this type of model, over 700 million years, the net rotation, which is right here in orange, evolves quite a lot by a factor of 2 or 3. And this, we need to understand how this net rotation evolves if we want to correct to use it for the plate reconstructions. And the way it evolves is not completely clear yet, but some of the peaks you have in net rotation, like this one, is correlated to a peak in surface velocity. So I'm sorry, this is a non-dimensional value, but you see still that it's a peak of surface velocity. So when you have the velocity going very fast, usually it's because you have a slab reaching either initiating or reaching the lower mantle. Then you have some sort of acceleration of the surface, and sometimes you have all the surface that accelerates as well. But sometimes you have a peak of surface velocities and not huge peaks of net rotation. Sometimes you have peak of net rotation without a peak of surface velocities. And this thing happens, for instance, when you have a sort of break-off of a slab. Then it's the mantle that rotates fast below the plates because of this kind of things. So we have to understand that, and maybe we can put this sort of new rules inside the augmented plate tectonic stuff. Yeah, I wanted to finish with the question of how plumes help to produce a dispersal of supercontinents. So I start with the same image that you have before. So what you see in very red, these are isotherms for plumes, and the color code here is still the same stuff for the color yellow red to red is hotter than average, and blue is colder than average, and it's just below the surface boundary layer here. And you have the divergence of the system still plotted here. So blue means trench, and red means a ridge here. So you have this system with here a trench that is retreating, in fact, another one like here. And you have a plume right here, and you see this plume has an influence over quite a large area for the continents, although the plume itself is small. And so you see here 10 million after the evolution of the system, so the continent is moving, mostly in response to those trenches that are retreating, that are moving around the system. So you still have a trench right here and right here. And when the system continues, you can see two interesting things. So you have a plume here that weakens the boundary layer and starts the initiation of a ridge. But also, you start to see that there is some stresses on the boundary layer that are thinning the boundary layer, and you see an onset of the fragmentation of the oceanic plate here. And then 30 million years after the first thing I show you. So here you see that in fact, the plume focuses the rift initiation, although the rift initiated before inside the ocean. So this sort of rift is like a scissor. It's progressing towards the inside, and you see that the temperature already evolved before the plate is open. Here, there is still a fragmentation on the way, and in fact, this piece of continent is starting to speeding up, as Dietmar talked before. And then it's 16 million years after, so the continents are stripped. This one is going very fast in response to slab pool here, and you have a new plume here that focused that went just below the ridges, and the propagation of the rift continues toward the north. And so when you analyze the force in this model, slab pool corresponds to, the plates have a velocities higher than the mantle below, meaning that they are sort of dragging the mantle 60%, over 60% of the model. But still you have 40% of the area of the model where the mantle that is sort of dragging the surface. In fact, the effect of plume here is not there is not the force to initiate a rift. It's not possible here. The buoyancy fluxes of plumes are known and are very small. They are like 10 to 100 times less than the buoyancy flux of subducting plates. But here the plumes, they act as a weakening, in fact, the boundary layer. So since here the hot means low viscosity, then it helps to decrease the strength of the boundary layer and to localize the initiation of the rift. So there are lots of drawbacks in that type of model, but I don't have time to talk about that. I'm sure you're going to have some questions about them. And so about this question, I told you that I would not answer, but today still this is what we have best to describe the kinematics at the surface. So having a dynamic theory to apply it to the Earth is still not ready yet, and I don't know, of course, in 50 years from now. Thank you.